Ah, water. Oh, iced water. Cheers. Thank you all. Lovely audience.
Okay, so Rob and I are just going to ask you a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Yes, sure.
And then we'll open it to the floor again, if that's all right with you.
Okay, that's all right.
So I guess, yeah, I'll go first. The first question, I suppose, is in chronological order.
I don't want to put my back to anybody. It's all right, yeah.
In chronological order, I suppose Monty Python, the writing room, did you all encourage each other, or was it incredibly competitive, or what was the writing room like in Monty Python?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, well, you can hear me. Can you hear me? You can probably hear me. It was quite competitive. That's a very good point. I mean, we actually got on very well, but we got on well because we were making each other laugh. But it was definitely a sort of feeling that everyone had to get their bit in, and you had to fight for your own bit of material. What we didn't do was write the whole of Monty Python together, all 6 of us. We'd be separate writing groups. John would write with Graham Chapman, because that's the way they'd always done it. I wrote with Terry, as I told you. That's we were writing together. Eric wrote on his own. And so what would happen is after a few days, we'd bring in all our kind of material and read it out. And that was a very key time as to, you know, how it was read and how it would be received. And that was quite competitive. But I mean, the great thing about laughter is it's not something you can fake. And if something works, it really works. It was sometimes there were things that were sort of gold dust. We just put them on the first pile. That's fine. There were other things that sort of just didn't quite work. But what would happen was the 2 of the other writers would take it over and try and do it. Like, I think Silly Walks was actually written by myself and Terry to start with, and then John and Graham in the end, or the other way around, I can't remember. And then there was a final pile of sketches which just, you know, never quite made it. But there'd be quite a fight for those. People would fight and say, no, this really is funny. Terry would say, it's really funny. And as I say, it's not something you can fake. If it wasn't funny, it wasn't funny. The more indignant he got, that became quite funny. So occasionally, you got the 2 extremes was Terry being Welsh and very passionate, would get very excited about things, and John being very English and sort of cutting and sardonic would just stoke Terry up completely. And it quietened down after a bit when Terry threw a typewriter at him. That kept him quiet for a bit. No, it was actually it was a great experience, the writing. It really was, and we all knew. I mean, it was going to be fun to act it, but that just the group of us together, reading all the material, adding bits, all the linking stuff was usually done in a group, was very, very productive, very exciting.
So I read as a child that you were an avid train spotter. Do you think that this was a later hint to your later career in being a travel documentarian?
Oh, well, I mean, possibly it was, really. I like to think that the train spotting was a sort of siding in my life, if you may use a railway expression, rather than the main line. It was a combination of 2 things, really. It was one that was my sort of anal neatness. I would love keeping lists and all that sort of thing. And train spotting is about lists. And it's about underlining the train you've just seen, the engine you've just seen, and all that. But also, it's to do with... I mean, I was born and brought up in Sheffield, and I never thought I'd go anywhere else in the world, really. People didn't go very far from Sheffield. One of the things I would do, my sister was 10 years older than me, worked in London, and we used to go to London on the train, and it was very exciting to go down to the station, and the Thames Clyde Express would come in, coming all the way from Glasgow through Sheffield and down to St Pancras. It took about 4 days, but anyway, it was just exciting. And these places, Glasgow, Carlisle, you know, wherever it was, sort of settled all these names on it. I thought, this is wonderful. So that appealed, I think, to a very, very early sort of need to travel and know about places that weren't Sheffield. So I think it was a combination of the 2, the train spotting. And in the end, I suppose I still do keep lists. I'm quite anally retentive. And I do absolutely love travelling still. So yeah, I think you've got a key thing there. Freudian sort of version of railways, yeah. Other people it's sex, for me it was railways.
I suppose the next question is to do with travels. After all of your documentaries and travelling all around the world, do you feel like your life perspective had changed?
Well, I think I've been really, really lucky to go to the places I've been to and to travel in the way I've been able to travel, which is not in a tour group with a very tight schedule, all going to the market on the same day or whatever and things like that. To be actually there to try and produce a report, really, and just the five of us, five others in the team. It's a great way to see the world, and you get access to places you would not normally go to. And also because, you know, you've got to fill the program out. We work every day, you know, there's not a day when you say, we'll stay in bed today and we'll just have a meal. You've got to go out there and you've got to get the material. So I feel enormously privileged to have been able to do that and do it for 9 series. I think what it does, it just gives you a world view, that's all. It makes you I suppose it makes you realise how small your own little world is. And you know, if you live in London, you tend to think it's the centre of the earth, or other people tend to think centre of the earth. As soon as you go away, you realise there are lots of people out there who don't know what's going on, don't care what's going on in London, or New York, or Paris, or anywhere else. I mean, I was in a place called Agadez, which is in Niger. It's pretty much as remote a place as you get. And Niger is, I think, about about second or third poorest country in the world. We got there and we heard about 9/11 and the attack on the Twin Towers. And it was almost inconceivable, but we did, and we were all desperately on the roof trying to get connections back to London and find out what had happened. And the next morning, yeah, I got up and I felt the world had changed totally, and I walked out in the street, and of course these people, they hadn't heard any news about it at all. They didn't really care. They were just, you know, the same as they were the day before. So you realise that there's a global perspective, which is interesting, and I think it's important to see things from other people, be able to see things from other people's points of view. Very, very important, because I think that's a lot of the trouble at the moment in the world, is that people get worried about that kind of freedom of information. They get worried about sort of the choices, the differences, and they just want everything to be the same as they want it to be, and that's where we're getting real problems at the moment. So I think people know a lot more about the world now than they used to, and I certainly do, and I feel better for it.
So I read that while you were doing Now, I think it was in Sheffield, that you could never sort of tell your parents you felt that you were doing TV. So I'm just wondering, how did you actually break it to them, or how did they find out?
Well, when I left university, my father really wanted me to go into one of the professions, or at least make some money, because he hadn't got much money. He didn't have any money to pay for me. And I really wanted to go into, as I said, into writing on and possibly performing on television. But the first job I got, as I left Oxford University with a second-class honours degree, was to be a compere on a pop show called Now! Which was produced by local television in Bristol. And you know, it was a very under-financed pop show, but you'd get occasional good guests. We couldn't get Beatles or the Stones, but you get the Yardbirds and people like that, and Eric Clapton and people like that, and Engelbert Humperdinck. Oh yes, those were the days. And that's what I was doing. And I would go up there, and for a day's work I'd be paid £35, which was a lot of money then. And and yet I couldn't tell my parents that this was what I was doing. I just said, I'm working in television. I didn't like to tell them that I was humiliating myself, doing ghastly, badly written sketches before introducing Patti LaBelle and her bells. So I just kept quiet. But then the Frost Report thing was easier, because that was BBC. And also my parents wouldn't have seen Now, because it wasn't broadcast in East Anglia, thank God. So I was just able to say I was working in television, and they thought it was the Frost Report. But I could never have, I could never have kept going on the money we got from the Frost Report. I could never have got married or got a car and all these other things. So Now, despised and scorned though it was, actually helped me for about 6 months to make enough money to say, well, I got married in '66, and then Now, it was never a big ratings hit, but it became then after about 6 months, and that was the end of it. But I'm deeply grateful to being asked to be on that. It saved my bacon at the time, enabled me, as I say, to tell my parents I was working in television.
I suppose my last question is quite a tough one. It was written down here. Do you have a proudest moment in your life? And if you do, what is that proudest moment? So very vague. Good luck.
Gosh, proudest moment. It's very, very difficult.
This award.
Very difficult. You know, well, yeah, this award. This award apart, I would say it's probably family things. It's like having your first child, or your second child. No, leave the second one. Or indeed the third. I've got third, yeah. So a bit of that, but...
second child and my parents are right there.
All right, yeah. Well, you know what it's like. But in terms of work and all that, it's really hard to tell. I think it was, all right, I'll give you one instance where I just was so surprised. About the fourth series we made was called Sahara. And I can remember it was a hard sell to the BBC, understandably so, you know, a whole series about sand and all that. But we had a very good guy called Peter Salmon, who was at the BBC, and he just said, I think you could make it work. All right, I'll accept your premise that there is more to the Sahara than you can see. It was on the old trading routes and all that. There must be a lot more geography and a lot more interest there and a lot more history. And I thought, oh God, you know, we set off and there was a lot of sand, and I thought, oh dear, have we blown this? And it was very different from Pole to Pole. We hadn't seen so many people. It was different from 80 Days. There was no time constraint. And I just remember being upstairs at my desk the night after it had gone out. And you're always a bit sort of nervous then. And was anybody watching at all? And the old fax machine sort of clattered through. And this bit of paper came through and it said, congratulations, first episode watched by 8.4 million people. And that was just a great moment, because I was so pleased for all the team. You know, it was a hard thing to do, it was a hard sell, but the fact we managed to interest people, you know, in the sand dunes and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there was a lot more to it, but the fact that we pulled that one off as well, it was a very proud moment. I always felt great that countries like, we went to a place like Mauritania, which I barely knew where it was, and you know, that was on the second episode, and that got about 8 million people. So I think to get that many people curious about parts of the world they knew nothing about was quite an achievement. I felt quite proud about that.
So my last question then is, I was wondering, what sketch were you particularly proud of?
Well, I quite like the fish slapping dance. I always say that's my favourite, because there's no way you can rather criticise that. You either like it or you don't. You can't say it would have been better with different sized fish or whatever. I mean, just here's what it is. And it was sort of made up rather at the last minute. And what I like about it is very, very short, but it's sort of, it just builds up very nicely within that. And there's one particular bit where, well, there's several sections to it. I'm not going to go on my seminar, but first of all, the little fish that I slapped John with. I mean, it was very good casting that, because I know that John doesn't like to be slapped with fish or or prodded or in any shape or form. So as I was doing it, I knew I was making him a bit ratty, even though he was doing it for money and getting paid for it. So that was a nice moment. But then he did a brilliant thing where he gets the big fish out, and instead of just hitting me with it, he does a very military sort of aiming thing, which is just a wonderful thing. And there's a little pause, then he goes whack. And I just think little moments like that, they're worth pages and pages of writing. They're just something spot on. And dear Ronnie Corbett, who died, you know, recently, was the absolute master of comic timing, and he could just make anything funny just by putting the right pause in at the right moment.
Okay, so now we might push our chairs back so we don't miss people if they're. You're fine.
Am I? Oh God, well, yeah, no. Maybe I'll stand there.
No, it's more for us to make sure we don't miss any questions.
Okay, yes. Well, maybe I'll stand. I'll just generally move around. Yeah.
So we'll open the floor to any questions.
Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, stick up your hand.
I've seen you a few times on the Late Late Show, and you said a few times, you know, you're never going to do another adventure, you're never going to travel in a few weeks later you did Europe, for instance, you did Michael Phelan's Europe.
Yeah.
What's next?
Well, the reason I always say no, because if you haven't actually made your plans, then what you're going to get is about 500 letters the next day saying, why don't you go so and so? What?
It was also at the point where you said, I think it was, you said you weren't going to do it, and then you wake up in the middle of the night, your wife would nudge you and say, come on, it's time to go to another
Yes, well, that's rather private. I don't know where you got that. Oh, they're bloody adventures. Cool, blimey. No, my wife is very interested in my seeing as much of the world as possible. That's a fair point. She's never discouraged me from going. And she's bought maps and things like that and atlases. But at the moment, all I can say is that I would still like to travel again. Now, if people use this word, the landscape of television has changed a bit. The BBC no longer commission, nor does anybody, 8-part series like we used to do. I mean, I think Full Circle around the Pacific was 10 episodes. And I think it built rather well, and that was part of it. But for some reason now, they're very nervous of long series being commissioned. So 4 is about the maximum. And I think it's a shame. But anyway, so... And there also, I'm very much aware that there are some very good other people making programs at the moment. Other people are travelling, and lots of people have done travel documentaries since. You know, Joanna Lumley and Stephen Fry and lots of people. So in the end, you've got to make sure that the way you're doing it is fresh, is different. It's not just doing exactly the same as before. So. The inclination is still there, and it's just got to click with a way of presenting a show and way of doing something that will be as striking as the ones we've done before. And there is a proposal at the moment to go and do something which I won't tell you about now because it may be completely the last you'll hear of it. But we're going to see the BBC on Monday, and that might turn out to be the next series, and it would be 4 episodes. So I'm quite keen to go. But there's also a couple of films parts I've been offered, and they've got to if they actually happen, then I won't have time to do the travel. But if they don't happen, then I can do the travel. So that's where we are at the moment.
Bit of a win-win.
Bit of a win. Well, yeah. I don't know. I can't like just being at home, really. Yeah.
Okay. Then.
Yeah.
Was it a difficult process to do the reunion shows 2 years ago?
Actually, not in the end. I mean, what happened with the reunion show was that. I mean, we've had many attempts at reunions in the past. It's never quite worked out. There was something in Las Vegas, a proposal in Las Vegas in 1998. And I was, and I think Terry Gilliam were both against that, partly because it was quite soon. It was less than 10 years after Graham's death. And it seemed odd to do Python reunion without Graham. As I've said, Python was a really self-contained unit. We all needed each other, absolutely, writing and performing. And also, I didn't feel Las Vegas particularly the place to do a Python reunion. But it was sort of ticked over. The idea was there. It was somewhere in our subconscious. But what happened was we had a court case against a guy called Mark Forstater, who was one of the producers of the Holy Grail. And it was all to do with a share of marketing revenue from Spamalot. It was quite an obscure thing. But we went to court over it, and we won on 2 points and lost on another. But going to court, whether you win or lose, is very, very expensive. And we had a barrister and all that. So Python was actually a bit short of money, and we hadn't been terribly well managed for a while. There was just nothing in the coffers. And we got a new manager, a guy called Jim Beach. Jim was a friend of Eric's from Cambridge, and he's also he's the manager of Queen, so he knows how to make money and knows how to keep things turning over. And we sat down and he said, well, you know, if you want to clear your debts and make some money from all this, all you do is a couple of nights at the O2. And people said, what? You know, the O2, I mean, the pop groups play there, pop stars play there and all that sort of thing. He said, yeah. Could we fill the O2? He said, well, you could certainly do a couple of nights. So we all sort of said, all right, well, okay. So the decision was taken within seconds. Nobody said no. Because I think we had confidence that Jim wouldn't have said this unless he felt it could happen. Of course, in the end, once he started to they put the tickets on sale, 5 shows were just sold out straight away. We then did another 5. So we did 10 altogether, far more than we intended to do. But once the ball had started rolling, it was you know, it was quite difficult along the way, deciding what was going to be in the show, how it was going to be produced, would you have dancers, would you have music, how big a set, all that sort of thing. But it all fell into place, and one of the key things was that we had a big screen on which we could show, for the first time, because the technology was so good, all sorts of clips and lots of Graham stuff and animation and all that. So Graham was very much integrated into the show, which I covered a lot of my concerns. And it was, I suppose we were a little bit worried about what it would be like when we actually got out there. But the atmosphere was absolutely extraordinary. Just such a wave of sort of emotion kind of and love and all that sort of crap as we got out. And you could just feel it, and we just felt all we've got to do is just stand there. Well, actually, I haven't got to stand there. We've also got to be really good at what we're doing to live up to it. But you just felt you were amongst a lot of people who were very pleased that you were there. And so the 10 shows, we all survived pretty well. I mean, everybody slightly creaky and old and doddery all got a kind of boost from the reaction, which lasted through the 10 shows. So it was very enjoyable in the end.
This whole side, no one has their hands up.
Lots of hands there. Yeah.
So was there a young you who wanted to be well known for something, and how does the way things have turned out now, how does that compare to your expectations?
That's great. Was there a young me? It was a young me. I mean, believe it or not, 70 years ago. It's interesting because I was quite, quite shy at school. I wasn't one of the ones who put their hand up. Sorry, it's the nudity again. And yet I really enjoyed acting. You know, and I enjoyed playing other people, other characters, which I suppose this happens a lot. A lot of actors are quite quiet people, and I just remember I would go to movies and I just wanted to, I would watch whatever it was, a Marlon Brando or a Western or whatever, and want to be one of the people in that movie. And I was, for at least an hour or an hour and a half afterwards, I was that person in that movie. You know, if they were dangerous, I'd be dangerous. If they were sort of, swaggering, I'd swagger a bit. I just would love to be in that position. I remember thinking, God, what a great job that must be, you know, to be on the screen that big, you know, doing all this stuff. And how it'll never, ever, ever happen, because it doesn't happen to people who live in Sheffield. It doesn't happen to shy boys who live in Sheffield. So I suppose my young self would be pretty amazed to, see me standing up here now in front of everybody else and talking about myself, but also acting on the big screen and all that. I mean, it's just something I didn't ever expect. But I don't see that I'm a different person. I see I'm still the same person, but I rather feel I've got away with it, you know. And someone's going to suddenly come along and say, "Excuse me, Palin, you're a shy boy from Sheffield. What are you doing out here? Hollywood, off you go. Thank you, Mr. Brando. Yeah."
You've expressed your love for writing and stuff when you were younger and everything. So, would you have any advice for young people who are interested in writing and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of encourage any young writer to try and sort of just be brave about what you want to write. Don't try and just fit in with the way you think things ought to be. I mean, that's a course, you can do that, but I don't think you'll ever really discover how good you are unless you write something distinctively your own. And the other thing I would say is just it's very good to write in partnership. Again, I was a little bit sort of, I wasn't too pushy when I was a writer, and I needed somebody like this guy at Oxford who said, no, you can write, you can do this, yeah. And we collaborated together, and a collaboration of any kind, having a writing partner, I found really, really useful. And just keep going at it if you can. Don't give up straight away. It's hard. And if you can act your own material, then that kind of helps.
Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions, and this guy, you would have missed him.
You've spoken a bit about the writing process, but I suppose one of the best things about Monty Python is that a lot of its greatest scenes are based on something very subtle, like a physical gesture, facial expression, even a noise. That scene where the hospital has the machine that goes bing.
Oh yeah.
I'm just wondering, how did that come out of the writing process? Did you try and plan these things out, or did you just emerged from the actors themselves?
I think it observe, you know, how these things came out, the machine that goes bing and all that. They come actually from situations. There's usually a bit of context with it. It's not just let's have a joke about a machine that goes ping. That was really to do. Graham Chapman was a doctor, and he was aware that that medicine was becoming very, very high tech, and instead of human beings being around the body discussing it, there'd be lots of machines, and he didn't think that was necessarily a very good thing. So it was about the whole idea of machines being around the body, and they all go ping at some point, which they do ping. I mean, we're kind of used to it now. So that was that. There was a rather nice, you know, talking about things working out in a way that you'd never ever expected, and also talking about my own point about observing people, especially at school. We had a teacher at Shrewsbury School, and I was in the 6th form, and he was a very nice man called Mr. Lacane, Lawrence Lacane, and he used to take lessons in the History 6th form library, which was a nice, lovely room, lot of bookshelves and all that sort of thing. A very nice room to be in. He loved libraries and he loved books, so he'd actually not teach us very much. He'd say, "Look, just write a bit about this, or you know, do a bit of reading or something like that." And what he would do is then look at the books in the library, and he used to go around, and we were all very quiet, so we'd just hear him, and he made this rather characteristic noise as he sort of looked for the books. And he would go down, he had rather sort of tight trousers and quite a large lower area. Anyway, and he would go down and you'd hear him say, "Nee." And I sort of must have remembered this, some deep recess of my mind. And we were writing the Holy Grail, and I just one night said I will write about a group of very threatening, evil-looking people who unfortunately say "nee" and "nee wom," and we did it. And I remember thinking at the time, "Is this going to work?" You know, it's kind of very. Where's the humour here? I mean, it was quite funny. It made me laugh anyway at the time, but not doing it. And then, of course, it's now a thing that lots of people say, "Oh, nee." You know, we'd love to hear you say "nee." And I actually met the teacher a long time after that, about 30 years later. I met Mr. Lacane, and he said, "Oh, Palin, is it true that the Knights Who Say Nee were based on me?" And I said, no, of course not, absolutely not. And he said, oh, what a pity, because I thought they were terrific. So he endorsed them as well.
Can I ask a question? Did you base the Biggest Dickus speech on a master at school?
Biggest Dickus? No, I don't think so, no.
Very.
Yeah, Lith, but yeah. Biggest Dickus, well, Biggest Dickus, just a silly name, really. A very schoolboy name, but I think it was, what we wanted was somebody, because Pilate, you know, was a very, very powerful figure with the power of life or death, but he couldn't pronounce his R's very well. He talked like Jonathan Ross. So when he's doing a great, you know, Willis Wadwick, you know, he wanks higher than any Rome and all that, they all laugh at him. So that was really about authority being laughed at.
They all pretended that they weren't laughing.
Yes. Well, yes, the crowd were laughing, but the guards around, they knew that their job depended on not laughing, which was a lot of spluttering. So that's why we decided that his friend should have a slightly different speech problem with a lisp, you know. Biggest Dickus. My friend, Biggest Dickus. Yes, nice to see you. So, but originally it was, again, there was a point. It was about authority, and the best way we felt to sort of counter authority was to make people laugh about it rather than sort of, you know, start shooting. So that was the idea. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take one last question. Who's that?
I've always kind of thought of the American group, the Why This Gives You Now, as being like the closest modern thing to Monty Python. Do you view any group today as being like best at like carrying on the legacy of Python, or not really?
Well, there were various people, you know. It's hard to say. I mean, I wouldn't say anybody actually is, to me, doing what Python did. And a lot of people who say what we do is a tribute to Python and all that, and the Saturday Night Live people and all that. But I think, which is great, but I think that Python was a much more sort of, it was a very sort of intense thing. It produced an awful lot of material and it had to be done in a certain way. It wasn't just certain sketches or certain jokes or funny voices. I mean, what we used to do, which I thought was the, you know, I liked most about Python, was be so much in each half hour. Some of it didn't work at all, but it was, you know, real. And the fact we had Terry Gilliam doing animation, I've never seen anybody bringing animation to a comedy show the way he did. So I don't think there is anything quite the same. There are people sort of in the same spirit. Vic and Bob, you know, did actually a lot of very Pythonic stuff. The Fast Show did some great, you know, created some great characters, wonderful characters. But then those characters played out each week. With Python, we generally used to have a different set of characters each time. I think we were just really lucky about the timing. When Python came along, there hadn't been anything really like that at all. And the 1960s had seen, you know, the Beatles, had seen Mary in music and Mary Quant in fashion, and people actually doing different things. In comedy, there wasn't really anything that new until Python came along right at the end of the 60s. And so we had the field to ourselves. And we did lots of different things and lots of different characters. And after that, it was very, very hard for anybody else just to do something without someone saying, oh, that's like Monty Python. And I think it wasn't helpful to some very funny people.
So that's all the questions. All that's left is to present you with the award.
Oh, I picked it up. Was that the right? Oh dear, I shouldn't have touched it.
No, it's okay. We'll just do it again for the cameras.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
So,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I have to keep clapping now, won't I? You can't believe it. I can't believe it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well clapped. Very well clapped. You must be worn out. Thank you very, very much.